As I speak this introduction, it is 2025. So, it is 100 years ago that composer and conductor Pierre Boulez was born. And it is 30 years ago that Dutch orchestra programmer Maarten Brandt published his book Wegen Naar Boulez, and that he interviewed Maestro Boulez twice in front of an audience. On September 26 in 1995, Pierre Boulez, who was in Holland to conduct Arnold Schönberg's opera Moses and Aaron, was given an Edison, and at the same time Maarten Brandt's book was presented. On October 28 in that same year, 1995, Maarten interviewed Pierre Boulez together with music journalist Paul Jansen in the Hilton Hotel in Amsterdam. Both of the audience interviews I was allowed to film. So now, in 2025, I thought Boulez's 100th birthday is the perfect moment to interview Maarten Brandt about Maestro Boulez, his book about the enigmatic composer of 1995, and the two interviews of that year, out of which you see images I shot in this film.
Well, I am a self-made musicologist. I don't say that I'm a doctor, I have no title or whatever, I'm self-made. And I think one of my most important specializations is the fact that I feel myself as a dramatist. What is a dramatist? What the Germans like to call dramaturg. That means you are involved in making programs, formats of programs for symphony orchestras. So to find combinations between pieces which make sense, so that the program as a whole has something to say to the audience, and you learn something new about pieces you think you know very well, but due to the confrontation with, for instance, 20th century music or unknown repertoire, you get new insights. It's like preparing a menu, so to say. And it's like programming, it's like, to keep it in the shortest possible terms, it's like tasting with your ears instead of with your mouth, with your tongue. So it's a kind of cuisinier, you are a cuisinier. Mm-hmm. And that brings me, for instance, to Boulez, who was a very many-sided, great artist, one of the greatest composers of our time, one of the greatest musical philosophers of his time, one of the greatest conductors of his time, but also he was a great innovator of artistic policy. And well, that is, I think, an explanation of my affinity with Pierre Boulez.
So, it was a record, that was the first time that you heard about Boulez?
I knew his name, of course. You know, Boulez was... and the first thing is the always repeated story about you have to shoot down opera houses, which was taken literally. You know that in a few years before his death, he was arrested by some imbecile policemen because they thought he was a terrorist.
Was it after 9/11?
I think so, yes. I think so, but he meant it as a metaphor, and he clearly explains it in my series of interviews. He hated, how you call it in English, routine? How you call it? No, but you know what I mean. Yeah. That laziness, I would say, and therefore he said we should destroy all opera houses. But he meant the wrong tradition. Not the right tradition. We come to speak about tradition in the Boulesian sense later on, I'm sure, but the wrong tradition. That you are too lazy to develop new formats, new thoughts, new philosophy, and so on and so forth.
I am more and more not only impressed, but more and more positive about people, composers, who know how to write. You know, I can really less and less accept the kind of amateurish writing. That's for me is a plague in contemporary art generally. I mean, you have a lot of amateurs. And what I call the cartoon spirit. When you have heard one thing for 5 seconds, you have understood everything. When you see also some paintings or so works of art, inverted commas, well, after 5 seconds you have understood everything. So where is the point? For me, I mean, a work which is important, and the legacy is important from this point of view, that you don't understand everything at every time. You have to listen to it more than once. And if you are going into a perspective, you know very well that there is something else. That's like your vision. You know, I look at you directly, I see your faces, but in the same time I look at your faces, I am aware of a kind of environment. And that for me is also the essence of an important work. That you can focus on something, but in the same time that you focus, that's not the only thing to look at, but you have a lot of things which are going on in the same time. Well, you cannot say polyphonic vision or polyphonic writing, even in the literal sense, but the polyphony of Ligeti, of course, has very little to do with the kind of academic polyphony. But that's, you know, superimposition of levels, and when you listen to that, you have also different levels of listening.
What was the moment that you decided, I'm going to write a book about Boulez?
I must start at the Dutch premiere of Répons. I've forgotten the year, but I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, in the Beurs van Berlage. I'm sure you were among the audience.
No, not that time, unfortunately.
No, but I was there. Beurs van Berlage, Répons. And I happened to know Eveline Nichols. She is the president of the Gustav Mahler Foundation in the Netherlands. But she was also befriended with Boulez. And I thought, well, it would be very interesting. I have perhaps the possibility to write an interview if Mr. Boulez has only 20 minutes or whatever for me next time. Well, I cannot promise anything, but I'll do my best. And he was willing. And I knew from other guys who knew Boulez very well, if you start an interview with Boulez, don't ask human interest things. Just start a musical subject. And I started about the link between, for instance, I remember exactly what I asked, between figure double prisme, very complex orchestral work by Boulez, and the Berg of the Three Pieces, Opus 6. And Boulez immediately grasped that I knew what I was talking about. And he got enthusiastic. And instead of talking some 20 minutes, we talked, I think, 75 minutes.
When was that?
It was after the evening he conducted Répons. He was still. He had must get his schedule the next morning.
I think it was in the 80s, in the second part of the 80s.
Yes. And the interview was a kind. And it was a kind of record magazine, not Luister, but another magazine. And, well, the editor was very enthusiastic. It was a rather big interview. You cannot published now anymore in an average magazine in the Netherlands, because everything has to be shortcut. But we really touched within the framework of the interview a lot of subjects. And I thought, when I reread that interview, this could be an exposition for a book. And I knew that Boulez would return in, what was it, 95, 94?
95.
Yeah, 95. To conduct a new production, Peter Stein, of Moses with Iron of Arnold Schönberg, and the symphonic program with the 3 pieces, by the way, with the then Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra. It's now again Concertgebouw Orchestra, and I happened to find out one of the agencies of Boulez. I think it was Roger Wright at that moment. And Roger Wright said, well, I don't know, but if you can make a kind of plan for the book of the subject you want to discuss, eventually the form, I cannot guarantee anything, but send it to me. I will discuss with Mr. Boulez. And I said, and everybody said, no, he won't do that, because that means that he has to plan more than one afternoon. Yes. And he will not do that. I designed a plan, and I thought, well, what would be more nice than to give a portrait of Boulez, of his own work, but in relationship with the composers which are his heroes. Beethoven, Debussy, Wagner, Berg, and so on and so forth, Mahler. And so I designed the form, and I said, well, it was a nice idea. I forgot it. And then I got a letter from the direct secretary of Boulez's office. Mm-hmm. That must have been Petra Altekruse or Astrid Schirmer. I don't exactly know, but one of the two. Mr. Boulez is very enthusiastic. I said, my goodness, wow. And so we planned how much time do you think? I said, well, I think we can spread it over. I said, I want to publish it in 95. I knew that already. So that we had a few years to go.
Because this was the beginning of the 90s, or when was it?
Yeah, so something like that. I think so, yes. Okay. And I think I'm, of course, willing to travel to Paris, to Salzburg or Vienna. And at that time, the recording companies, they had still money for a project like this. So I was at rehearsals, I was at concerts, and dinners and everything. And it clicked very well between us. Yeah. But it was already clear from the beginning, this first interview, Boulez knew that I had the clues about what he found important, but I found important was for him important, and so his mission, so to say, not his personal life. He never, Boulez discusses with nobody. It will remain a great enigma. And, that's something for the Telegraaf, but the Telegraaf audience is not the Boulez audience, as you probably know. And it's pure about the music, about his thoughts about music, his philosophy, about the repertoire he conducts, and about his own pieces, of course. And, it was a great success. He was very friendly, very cooperating in every respect. Very nice. I learned to know him as a very nice man, knowing very well what direction he would like to go, but very willing to explain everything and take the time. And he was, how busy Boulez was, But you had a feeling when you were talking with him that he had all time for you.
Okay. Because I'm very interested to hear from you. Do you remember the first time? Was it in Paris, the first?
Paris, yes.
Was it in Erkan?
No, it was I think it was the Rue Citroën or something in Paris. Modern apartment with fantastic mural paintings, fantastic. And there we started. I remember that I was invited to come in, of course, in his apartment, and immediately I got a fantastic cup of tea with a fantastic cake. I remember, a very good cake, by the way. Mm-hmm. And Boulez seemed very enthusiastic, and he trusted me. Mm-hmm. And it was immediately trust between us, I must say. And what I felt right from the onset, and that was more or less so during that first interview in Amsterdam, but now even stronger. And of course, I'm in comparison with Boulez. Who am I? I'm a simple dramatist, journalist. But Boulez showed also for the one who interviewed him, in this case, myself, the greatest respect. And I felt so at ease, because the things he was dealing with were the same things I was interested in. And he felt that I was really interested. That must be the feeling. And therefore he opened himself to discuss at length about my favorite subjects. Berg, Wagner, Mahler, Debussy, Boulez himself, Webern, Schönberg, just mentioned it. And thoughts about programming. And later on, we talked a lot in Vienna and during the Salzburger Festspiele. And I saw him conducting one of the most flabbergasting Mahler sixth I've ever heard. And to Mahler we come perhaps later in relation with Boulez. But also I saw him conduct Exposant Fixe, the later version, not Memorial. That's the beginning, but with the amplified flutes and the live electronics. Huh? And he was conducting both those productions, and that was fantastic.
Where was it?
I think the Mahler 6 was in Vienna, and and another program with the Vienna Philharmonic was also with the. But what Boulez say, I'm a mix of two cultures. Boulez tended to say the French one and the German one.
After the death of Stravinsky in 1971, I was asked to write a piece about Stravinsky. And finally, I didn't write only about Stravinsky, but I was writing about the parallel that Adorno has made between Schönberg and Stravinsky. And he called Stravinsky the reactionary, or more or less, and Schönberg the progressive. And I thought it was quite wrong to have this kind of view, because of course Adorno was very devoted to the Vienna School and to Schönberg especially. And they despised or discarded Stravinsky very lightly. And I think that's on the contrary, if something can bring quite close to each other, Stravinsky and Schönberg, that's the ideal of neoclassicism. As a matter of fact, they were not the only ones, because you could see that in literature, you could see that in painting also. It seems to me that this generation of Stravinsky and Schönberg, and other people also around, which was born, Schönberg is born in 1874 and Stravinsky in 1882, so that's just 8 years difference, that's much difference. And as a matter of fact, Ravel is in between, 75, born in 1875. And in fact also, in all these composers, Ravel included, the desire of the law, the Gesetz in German. So, you know, in modern time there is a lot of talk about Gesetz, and that's not really quite by chance, because the moment in the life of Schönberg of exploration, which was just before the First World War, from 1909 until 1914, practically, was really a moment of wild exploration. And when you see the works which are out of that, not only the Opus 16, but also the theatrical works like Erwartung, Die glückliche Hand, the leader of Opus 22, the beginning of Jakob's Reiter. Really, that's something, you know, where all laws are abolished and transgressed. And you have the same kind of attitude, like, for instance, Kandinsky. When Kandinsky began his abstract painting, that was approximately in the same time. And you see a desire for experimentation and for getting rid of everything which tradition has proposed. And then after making this, having made these big gestures of transgression, then you have the impression that everybody is afraid of something. And is afraid that, you know, you cannot live in transgression forever, because you will lose track of the musical language, and you cannot just go on only transgressing, because at the end of the transgression you have, you know, what the Russian painters found. You find the white square or the black square with nothing in it, just nothing anymore. And certainly these people were afraid of nothing, nihilism. And therefore, I mean, they began to find the laws again. And certainly with Kandinsky, it was exactly the same attitude. Even with Klee, which was much more inventive in a way, progressive, in a kind of very more restricted field. But you see also this desire in the paintings of this period, Mondrian above everybody, this desire for geometry. And visually, that's very striking, the desire of geometry of these three people at the same time, Kandinsky, Klee, and Mondrian. And I suppose that you can transpose that in music, and you have also the same desire for a very strict geometry, which contains this kind of transgression you have made. And you discover progressively the law, the Gesetz again. And certainly Schönberg was very serious about the Gesetz, the law, because he was belonging to a tradition. And he could not get out of this tradition. The tradition was Bach, was Mozart, was Beethoven, was Brahms, was Wagner. And even more Brahms and Bach than even Beethoven or Wagner. There is something very strong in the discipline of Schönberg. And certainly he was serious about it. He wanted to find a language which was in the same time classical, but using other words, which I call once, sometimes my humor is not always very well understood, but I thought it was a kokoschisiert Brahms, you know, and that's a little bit, you know, the portrait of Brahms through Kokoschka, you know, and he has this kind of vision with a solid elements of grammar, but with what seems at first a distorted vocabulary. So it is, you know, it is an attitude which can be strange to us. And I had not great understanding for that, I remember, when I was younger. Maybe because I was younger, precisely. And now with age, I see that with bigger distance. And I think certainly the effort of Schönberg is certainly very valid. I will tell you more about the language of Moses, but I mean, we began with a comparison between Stravinsky and Schönberg. Stravinsky does not belong to a tradition like Schönberg, not at all. He's an outsider. He's, you know, tied with a kind of Russian tradition, as short as it is, because in the time of Stravinsky there was very, not even a century of tradition. There was, and the tradition was a kind of nationalistic tradition, like Rimsky-Korsakov, especially at the end of his life. And Mussorgsky was the big exception, and you have Tchaikovsky, Rimsky, also two things which are not, not together, which don't go well together. You had a discrepancy already in that, and Mussorgsky was a complete outsider. And Stravinsky was belonging to a country with no tradition, or the only tradition, if you can call that, even that was the French tradition, and in France we have no tradition either from this point of view. There is, there are exceptions, but there are no tradition like in Germany, for instance, or in Germanic music. And so Stravinsky, when after this period of research and experiments and adventure, then also he saw that he could not go further, very, very much further, without having in his grip a vocabulary much more logic, much more consequent. But the attitude of Stravinsky was like you go into an antique shop, and then you look at the works of the past, and for instance you see an old trumpet which is 100 years old. Oh, you see, that's very interesting. I will make a lamp out of it. And you transform, like the antiquarians, you transform a trumpet into a lamp. And that's funny. And that's a kind of distorted view of things. He did not look for a vocabulary in that, but he distorted and made another image of that. I say that Schönberg was kokoschkisierend Brahms. And I can say here, the relationship of Stravinsky with history is much more like somebody, like a designer, like a decorator, which take an object and change the function of the object without changing too much the object. You put maybe a lamp in it, and that will be a bulb, in it, and it becomes a lamp. But that's a game. He plays with the history. Schönberg doesn't play at all. He's deadly serious. For this sake. And therefore, for me, the game of Stravinsky sometimes is, a game I personally don't appreciate very much. But I understand that all other people can find the kind of distortion of displacement of the object interesting. But for instance, I was speaking with one of you the other day, and for me, I compare, for instance, the fugues of Stravinsky in the Symphony of Psalms, the second movement, and the fugue which opens the music for strings and percussion orchestra of Bartók. And the fugue of Stravinsky is a fugue with, of course, different intervals, but you have the first and subject of fugue, and then at the fifth you have the answer, and then you have the other answer. That's with different intervals, but that's typically the fugue as you see in the Baroque time. Only imitated, just painted with another color.
Like the of Bach Musikalisches Opfer. It has something to do with that kind of theme.
Well, that's less complicated. That's the Musikalische Opfer. That's the technique of Stravinsky in the fugue is much more simple, to not say rudimentary. And you have these Handelian rhythms, which are a quote of history. You have the dotted rhythms like that. Okay, but in Bartók, then you have a completely different conception of the fugue. It begins first with different phrases, which breathe differently, and then this breathing, which is a kind of expansion of horizontal phrasing, then the fugue begins to expand in another direction, because you have the first sentence above, under, and getting from A, you get to the E flat, the maximum, the maximum of occupation of the space, of the musical space. And then we begin and we finish by A. So you have a complete new conception of the fugue, and you cannot think at all when you hear this movement. You don't think at all of Bach, of Handel, of anything. You have a pure Bartók. When you are listening to the fugue of the Symphony of Psalms, you hear somewhere you know, a classical fugue, only a little bit tilted. And that makes the difference for me between, you know, you can be inspired by something, but you have to go to the core of the question. You have to go to the very bottom of the problem to solve that in a different way, which is not just a kind of imitation with some different features. And that's the difference also between Schönberg and Stravinsky.
It's a misunderstanding that you have to understand every secret of Schönberg, Boulez, Weber in order to be able to enjoy the music. Okay. But the problem is that you must be willing to open yourself for the mystery, to open yourself for something unknown. Like when you undertake a journey to an unknown country you know nothing about, and you get fascinated by the landscape without exactly knowing what has happened there, but you get fascinated by it. Openness.
Openness, okay. That's interesting, because that's always one thing that was, let's say, kind of a mystery for me when I think and speak and listen, etc., to Boulez. So what does he want from me as his listener? Does he want me to hear the aesthetics? Does he want me to hear an architectural piece of art? Does he want me to be in the line of history, following modernism? What does he want from me?
It's a very interesting question. It's very hard to answer. I think it's a combination of all elements. But I remain by what I said. Just a few... let's suppose you see an abstract painting. And you don't recognize a concrete subject. You know? Yeah. You see Kandinsky, you see Franz Marc, or you see Mondrian, or later, or Jackson Pollock, abstract expressionism. You don't understand anything about it, but you are fascinated by it, by its gestures, by its colors, by its combinations. And I think that is what it is about. And I think that you can know everything about musical theory, and of course for musicians it's very important because they have to perform it, that they are able to analyze the whole thing, but in order to enjoy it, no, I think that all great pieces of art are about the big questions of life. How abstract it may be, but the big questions of life, and those questions will luckily never be answered in a definite sense. That's why the big art is about. And then I'm not speaking about Stamitz, Kotzelu, but I'm speaking about Beethoven, to restrict myself to the classical tradition. I'm not speaking about Khachaturian, Shostakovich. I'm speaking about Boulez, about Berio, about, the real great fundamental questions. What is the big work of art? And I think I have mentioned in this book what Boulez quotes from the Lettres à Sophie Volant, Diderot, one of the French philosophers. And then they discuss the big work of art. What is the big work of art? Well, imagine, says Boulez, more or less, I quote him not literally, but the idea, in the beginning you are in complete darkness. You don't see anything. But as soon as your eyes are adapted to the darkness, you may see some fake contours, And when you approach the work of art, you get more light, and finally you see the whole thing. And you think, well, I can see the big work of art. But then you look more thoroughly to the work of art, and then you are again in complete darkness. Yeah. And that's Bach, Beethoven, Boulez, the real great, to restrict myself to music, but it's also with Thomas Mann, a novel by Thomas Mann, or, you know, Faust by Goethe, or the great works of art. You are always puzzled, and you never. We discussed before the interview. It was interesting. You said about dialectics. That it's too simple. You have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. But if you think you have found a solution, the solution is an illusion, because what you think is a solution is a new contradiction. Yeah. And you get a kind of chain reaction, and this chain reaction creates the tension by means of which you are attracted to the musical discourse. And that's very true of all great music, and not in the latest place, the music of Boulez.
Is that the reason you think that Boulez called himself a dialectical composer?
I don't know, because I didn't pose him that question in the way you are posing the question to me, but I think Boulez was, of course, like the Second Viennese School and the Umfeld, the environment, very much influenced by Adorno, which was he was at his turn very much influenced by Hegel. Yeah. And but I think there is in the big works of art, the solution is only a kind of illusion, because it's when you look back to the solution, it's a new contradiction. And there's another line in this chain reaction, that is that the material is very interesting, that the material which represents the form is at the same time distorted. Yeah. And the distortion is part of the form, the distortion. And that's not created by Boulez. Look to the Hammerklavier Sonate by Beethoven, the finale, this fugue subject, which is used by Boulez, not in the literal sense of the quotation, but the idea. And that's very interesting. And distortion as a means of active creation. So distortion and creation are not opposite, but they are, they belong together in great music. I'm not speaking about a simple concerto grosso by Telemann or whatever, with all respect for Telemann, of course. But we are speaking about the highest possible forms of classical music.
So the mystery goes on and on and on. It never solves.
Yes, and that's so interesting.
What I find so attractive, and for me in composition, that you must give always an element of recognition. You recognize something, and in the same time you don't know what you recognize. And that's exactly the mystery of the great works. That you have a kind of, not contradiction, I would like to say a dialectic between what is recognized, what is not recognized. If you have a work or vocabulary when you don't recognize anything, when you have no the possibility of recognizing anything at any moment, then you are lost constantly, then your interest has gone, because you don't have really a way of following. But if you recognize everything at every time, very trivial, thematic material, then you are not interested, because you will recognize that immediately, and your interest is not kept with the thing. But when you have a dialectic between some element which is the same and other elements which are not the same, so this kind of balance between knowledge and absence of knowledge, recognition and absence of recognition, that's for me which makes the big works. And the great works surprise you always, because even if you know them, you don't know exactly why they are so surprising. And even if you analyze that, but I mean, why, for instance, the composer chose this? why he chose that.
Therefore, I think that works like, apart from Boulez, works like Tristan, like Pelléas de Mélisande, works like the B minor Mass of Bach, will not stop to give us new ideas. So in that sense, the great works of art are never finished, because in the memory of the listener, always new secrets are revealed. And it will never stop. And therefore you can always go back to Opus 131, for instance, a string quartet by Beethoven. You can always go back to Tristan, to Così fan tutte, Mozart, or Figaro. It's very interesting, but you would say, what the hell is Boulez, why is he interested in Figaro? Not because of the story, but because of the complexity of the ensembles. The finale of the second act is, if I quote right, or the first act, but one of the finales in Figaro of Mozart is terribly complex. And that is what interests Boulez, and therefore it's this great admiration of Mozart, not because of the extra musical material thing, the anecdotal material. And therefore he was interested in Wagner, because the way he deals with leitmotifs is also a solution which is not a solution. That's what he discovered in Wagner, and therefore he was very interested in Parsifal in the Ring, you know, the legendary Ring recording with Giraud. And that's what he saw in Wagner, in that sense, foreshadowings of serialism and 12 notes, and 12 tone, not in the literal sense, but the idea, deriving material from very small motives. And the motives become complexer and complexer and complexer. And what Boulez told me, yes, okay, the Ring by Wagner now has a duration of 14, 15 hours, but he had so much material, if he had liked, he could have expanded it to 20 or 30 hours, because so much material was created. In Rheingold it's still simple, but in Walküre it becomes already more elaborate, and so on and so forth. And that's something you see, but with Boulez's own work as well. When he started Répons, it was a piece of 16, 17 minutes, and later on it went on to 45 minutes, what it is now. Yeah. But if he had devoted himself more to composing than conducting, that's perhaps his tragedy. Then Répons could have become a piece of 2 hours, why not?
Had he finished Répons when he died?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It is at the same time open, and it is finished. It's
again the dialectic.
Yes, there is a solution, but it's open. Yeah. And if Boulez had, of course, I'm very grateful that he conducted so many things. But one thing is a pity, that there was not much more time left for composing. It would have been very interesting how Répons would have developed. And what is very interesting in this respect is, you know, he wrote the so-called dérive pieces. The first piece, the dérive, is an element of Répons which he used for a piece for some 6 minutes. But dérive 2 is one of his longest pieces, 50 minutes.
Well, Please Rempli is more than an hour.
Yes, it depends on his first recording was just a small hour, and later on his tempi became more Wagnerian, and so it became 65 minutes or so.
Same question about Please Rempli. Was that finished when he died?
He was still puzzled about Tombeau.
The last piece.
Yes, yes, he was still puzzling. He was also puzzled about Figure double prisme. But at the same time, it's presentable as a piece. We are speaking about masterpieces as they are.
Yeah.
But it is what I said. The listener it's my philosophy, and it is perhaps a bit influenced by the idea of Boulez, that something can be finished at the same time and be unfinished at the same time. As long as a piece like Beethoven's Opus 131 continues in your subconsciousness, it's not finished. That means that you are, as listener, a co-creator. Not that you are composing, but in your mind you are composing. So that is perhaps a very strange. You understand what I mean?
Yes, I understand.
And that is Boulezian. It's finished, but at the same time, it's open for development.
I think that in '67, I did not dare to do anything which was not written in the score. I was very literal at this time. I say, if there is no ritenuto written, I will do no ritenuto. If there is no accelerando written, I will do no accelerando. And now I must say that I am much more unfaithful from this point of view, but much more faithful to the deep meaning of the score. Especially the music of Debussy, especially of the late Debussy, of the last period of Debussy, is essentially a music of transition, like Wagner, as a matter of fact. I think that's the thing which relates Wagner to Debussy. That's exactly that. That the kind of extraordinary sense for transition they have, both of them. And for transition, you have to go from a moment to another one. And you cannot really go from a moment to another one just brusquely. You have to make that in the same time invisible and very present. Invisible because, exactly I can imagine the reaction. And myself sometimes I say, oh yes, I have changed tempo, but I did not know when exactly. And that's the point. That you convey this change of tempo with a kind of sense, a feeling of development, of trajectory, but you notice it later and not at the moment. For me, to have this kind of feeling of transition and this mastering of transition, everybody should know that you have changed the tempi too late to be aware of that. And that's, that's the surprise. Because, that's slow. Well, that's slow, and you notice it later, and, that's quicker. Or in the jeu, for instance, at the very beginning, you have the slow beginning, and then you have this beginning of the quick tempo, and then I slow down progressively, and then I go back to the original tempo because it's repeated with an notation. And then you don't know that the transition has been done, and there are many places like that in jeu. Which have to be treated in this way, very subtle, and in the same time in a very controlled manner. And that's the difficulty, that you have to control this change, and in the same time to have them not noticed. And I think that's the progress I made during all this year. But it requires also, a freedom. You look at the text, and surely now. Yesterday, for instance, in Verkehrtenach, well, that's quite another style. But I mean, I don't care. No, I care very much. But I don't care if the ritardando is on the third beat. If I think that the ritardando has to begin on the first beat, I begin on the first beat, and I say, I have the same attitude with myself as a composer. If I have written a ritenuto there, And I know that this ritenuto will be more efficient and more necessary at the beginning of the bar, not at the middle of the bar. I do it at the beginning of the bar, that's it. And I am, in the same time, less literal, but much more accorded to the text. And therefore, that's a kind of paradox, but I have more freedom and in the same time more control.
Boulez himself used a metaphor when he was asked to describe his music or his thoughts about art and so forth. And then he used often the metaphor of a spiral. The circulation without an end.
Guggenheim Museum. Yes, that means that when you are in the Guggenheim Museum, because that is where the metaphor stems from, the architecture of the Guggenheim Museum. When you are standing on that spiral, you see what is behind, and you see what is coming, and that is tradition. And tradition is ever ongoing, and the spiral is also ever ongoing. Tradition is not, that is an image which Boulez hated, a frozen past. I think it was Gustav Mahler or somebody else who said, it is, I can only say it in German, Tradition ist nicht das Anbeten der Asche, aber das Weitergeben des Feuers. So it's not the worshipping of the ashes, but it's to transmit the fire. And that means that there is only in the terms, Boulez uses the notion tradition, the tradition of innovation. And no matter if we are speaking about Monteverdi, Josquin-des-Prez, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Wagner, Debussy, and so on, Boulez. There is only one tradition, innovation. And it has nothing to do with the trends, that innovation, but it is the innovation of the all-time presence of actuality.
Again, I think this is a matter of dialectics.
Yes.
How the present and the future
are connected. Yeah. It's a chain reaction. And the interesting thing is, of course, that Beethoven could not foresee what Mahler would be doing, or Wagner. But when you look back, you see the connections. But that's also something Boulez stated. When you look back, you see that there is a clear connection between, for instance, Beethoven and Wagner, and Schönberg, and so on and so forth, and Wagner and Debussy, not to forget. But the composers themselves were not aware of that. Beethoven was not thinking about a guy who would build Bayreuth in order to produce a 4-evening presentation of a music drama. But when you look back, you see connections. That's very interesting. That is the great mystery of tradition. And I'm not speaking about the tradition of Stamitz, Hummel, but the real great composers, the real great artists. Literature, you have the same, of course. I mean, you're speaking about Thomas Mann, James Joyce, and others.
But where in this entire story, Maarten, does taste play a role?
Well, taste is, for me, about quality. And Boulez is also very severe about musical education when it comes to the awareness of what quality means.
What?
Quality. Kwaliteit. Kwaliteit.
Quality.
Yeah. Sorry for my bad English. No. Quality. You can replace that, yeah. Quality, but quality. And yeah. he hated that memory of Mozart, and every note of Mozart was recorded. And he said, I admire Mozart in many respects, but we must be honest, not everything by Mozart is of the same quality. And the problem with our time is that this madness for completeness. Every single note of a composer in order to celebrate his, it must be recorded. And there are pieces by Mozart which are not quite interesting, and there are pieces which are of unforgettable quality. And
but who or what is the person or institution that determines what quality is?
That's very dangerous, because then you come into politics and you come into and art de kunst, and that's not what it is about.
But who is to determine when we can?
I think that time is the most important element in this. When you have a critical distance to a certain composer, you will be more able to recognize the special things like quality and originality. I mean, when you look to the sons of Bach, they found their father old-fashioned rubbish. I'm a bit exaggerating, but those remarks were there. It was not music of their time, of their taste. But later on, Bach was rediscovered, and we recognized that this quality was so high that you cannot restrict it to explain this in terms of Baroque or non-Baroque. It is something, beyond timeless. And I think the same will be true with our friends Hugh Beving and Heinz Zimmer. Sooner or later we will rediscover the importance of avant-garde. We are now living in a time in which the avant-garde is history. It's interesting to note that. And of course there was also much rubbish in the avant-garde. You have many Boulez imitators. It's always the same thing. But there's only one Boulez. And only the cosmetics were imitated, but not the inner quality of the music.
Okay. In 1995, your book is published.
Yeah.
Wegen, how trajectories or paths to Boulez?
Yeah, you could say that.
Wegen Naar Boulez.
Yes, it's trajectories. Trajectory is also a term which Boulez uses himself very much. So via Wagner, via Mahler, via Debussy, via Beethoven, and so on.
Yeah. So
Therefore I said also the master in dialogue with tradition. And tradition in the sense, as we defined it, the ongoing innovation.
Again, dialectics.
Yes.
Yeah. 95, your book is published, and Boulez is in Holland. And suddenly we can see Maarten Brandt interviewing Boulez for an audience once in the Hilton Hotel in October, but before when Boulez, Dutch National Opera, and also is the presentation of your book, but also Boulez is the lucky winner of an Edison.
Yes. Yes, that was because of his, and I agree with that completely, because of his, already during that time Mahler was overplayed. I mean, there were so many Mahler recordings, and it's good that this Edison is mentioned, because that brings me to Boulez and Mahler, especially during a time in which it's Mahler before, Mahler after, and you get completely Mahler, Malende. That's the different term for becoming mad. But his vision on Mahler, Boulez's vision on Mahler, was so revolutionary, because, and that's the interesting thing, most conductors approach Mahler via the past. Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Mahler, eventually Wagner. But Boulez was first and foremost a composer and an advocate for the newest and hardcore avant-garde music. And that was his way to the past, just the other way around.
Yeah.
And the sixth is, of course, a very crucial piece in Mahler's work, like the seventh and the ninth. Sixth, seventh, and ninth are the most revolutionary Mahler symphonies. The Adagio of the 10th, of course, because they meant a lot for Schönberg, Berg, and Weber. Berg's Opus 6 is unthinkable without Mahler 6. This is kind of, if there is one sequel of Mahler 6 on the same level, then it's the three pieces by Berg. And as a kind of salut from Berg to Mahler, he uses in the march, without quoting Mahler, only a gesture, the use of a big wooden hammer. And you know that is used in the finale of Mahler's 6th Symphony. And you know that, I believe it was Berg in a letter to Weber, there was only 1/6 in spite of the Pastoral Symphony. And by that he meant Mahler's 6th Symphony. It was for Berg the greatest symphony. And you can imagine what it meant for Boulez. Yeah. Because far before he started to conduct Mahler, he conducted Wozzeck and Schönberg and everything, you know.
He approached Mahler via Berg.
Yeah, yes, in the 20th century in general. Okay. So you can look to Mahler as somebody who ends the Romantic era, yeah. But at the same time you can look Mahler as the beginning of the 20th century. Okay. And that is what Boulez does.
Okay. That's a different kind of approach than Bernstein had.
Yes, and what I like about Boulez, and that's great. Boulez has nothing with the emotionalism of Bernstein, but he said, if the discoverance of Mahler, we must be very grateful to Bernstein, because Bernstein was one of the greatest advocates. And at the same time, and a bit later on, of course, Haitink and Kubelik, those were the first cycles. And that was great of Boulez, because he disliked the emotional approach of Bernstein, but at the same time he recognized the greatness.
Mahler is a Janus face. He's turned to the past and he's turned to the future. And you can take both faces at face value, if I can say so. Because, for instance, you have, and generally that's the case with quite a lot of composers. But Mahler had a kind of the language of Mahler sometimes, like Adorno said, as a matter of fact, I am not the first to say that, that's the language of Mahler from time to time is much less, quote-unquote, advanced than the one of Wagner, for instance. When he goes to the kind of folklore, the language is very simplified. But on the other hand, you have all these kind of form in the Mahler symphonies, which is on the contrary quite difficult to perceive, because that's first on the long range, and second the construction, and especially from the Fifth Symphony on, the polyphony is very dense, very complex, and difficult to perceive as such. And that's the kind of modern side of Mahler. And therefore, you have somebody in the past like Bruno Walter, who was on the conservative side, and you have somebody like Schönberg, who was on the progressive side. And I think that with Wagner it was exactly the same. And still now, you can see this type of audience in Bayreuth who wants their Wagner to be absolutely not touched, never, and to be conserved like that in eine Büchse. And then you have people who think that Wagner, on the contrary, is the beginning of something, and you have to take a new approach in time. Each time you are confronted with this music, which asks you questions very strongly. Therefore, I think, some great composers are always ambiguous, and I find their ambiguity is interesting, precisely.
A question that pops up for me now. So, Berg was influenced by Mahler 6. Boulez has always been influenced by the 3 orchestral pieces of...
Not only, but also by Webern.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, the Webern aspect has underlined too much, has been with the commentaries. But later on, Boulez said that perhaps Debussy was even a greater innovator than Webern for him.
But
that's interesting, eh?
Absolutely. But to finish my question, because it popped up suddenly. So, again, Berg was influenced by Mahler, and he composed his 3 orchestral pieces with that influence, one could say.
Without quoting, more the gestures, the emotionality.
Yeah.
But the music is quite different.
Yes, but could you say that especially some orchestrations of the notation of Boulez was influenced by those 3 orchestral pieces?
The notations are a very special case, because you know how it started with those tiny little piano pieces, and wrongly the notations for orchestra are seen as orchestrations of the piano pieces, which is not true. The piano pieces are, I would say, are containing the basic ideas, but the orchestration is a completely new redaction. Redaction, can you say? Reduction? Redaction? Of rethinking. That is the right word. Rethinking of the material. And what is interesting about the notation is that it combines in a very thorough and refined way both elements. At least 3 elements: Stravinsky, Berg, and Debussy, and even Ravel. But the stylistic consistency is so strong that you feel every note is Boulez. Yeah. But speaking about tradition and innovation. But indeed, the notation by Boulez are a sequel of the genre orchestral pieces of the Second Viennese School, partly.
Yeah.
One could say, yes.
And within this Second Viennese music, especially the 3 orchestral pieces of Berg were very important for Boulez.
Yes, also the 5 pieces by Schönberg, don't forget, and 6 pieces and 5 pieces by Webern. You know that Boulez recorded almost everything of Schönberg and everything by Webern, everything.
I must tell you that we discovered Webern in a kind of very funny way, because then the performances of Webern were atrocious. There is only one word for that. I remember the performance of Symphony Opus 21 once, and poor Leibowitz, who was not really gifted, but I mean, he tried his best to promote this music, and it was a counter-promotion, because what you heard, that was instruments which were instrumentalists who did not understand anything, who played some notes without any reason, without any meaning, without any connection, without any continuity, without any coherence. So, I mean, I could add without a lot. And when you heard this music, you looked at the score and you say, oh God, that's very interesting. The idea of Webern to innovate the language and so on. And then when you heard these results, you say, well, that's completely crazy. Yes, I mean, and you were completely, schizophrenic, because at one point when you were looking at the score, you found that interesting, and when you heard that, you did not understand at all the relationship between the score and the sound. And that's, of course, I cannot blame the people at this time. I'm speaking of 45, 46, long ago, 50 years ago, because there was no acquired knowledge. And I see now, for instance, after 50 years, when we have auditions for my ensemble, for instance, of course they are, included in the ensemble, but people come already ready for this language. And that's a kind of slow evolution, but it is really an evolution which goes constantly. And I am part of this evolution. I suppose that when I was looking at these pieces of Webern, not especially the Opus 10, because the Opus 10 is a very flexible piece, very seductive even. But I'm speaking of the pieces which are more problematic, as a matter of fact, like the Opus 24, the Concerto for 9 Instruments, or the Symphony Opus 21, or the Quartet Saxophone 22, or the variations or something, or the late, what I call the late Mondrian Webern or something, you know. And certainly these pieces, you know, first you see the structure very strongly, and you don't see very much the poetry of it, because you miss the phrasing. And I remember once I did, because I like to do that from time to time, I took, in front of an audience, there was a kind of congress of analysis of music. And instead of analyzing the music, I took the Opus 24 with the musician, you know, with the musical examples. And instead of saying, you know, there are 3 notes here, 3 notes, 3 notes, 3 notes, so the series divided and so on, you know, this kind of analysis which is completely sterile. I mean, you know, 12 divided through 4, that makes 3, of course. I mean, there is no other way around. And I say, no, that's not that which is important. Which is important, that's the gesture, why it is. There is, you know, these groups of notes, but after that they are not symmetrical completely. There is a ritenuto, and that makes a phrase. And this phrase you must consider as the most important, and not only the division by 3, you know, in groups of 3. And for me, I mean, I think I had this evolution because at the beginning also I was very attracted to analyze, you know, literally the music. But after that, I knew very well that the literal aspect of that is important, of course, but that's just the first level. And to access to the real musical thinking, to the real musical gesture, to the musical feeling even, you have to go beyond that and to look at what I call the envelope of the gesture, you know, which makes things as a whole and not only separate entities. So I think that's the difference I see now in Webern, and also I must say that I can transmit that much better now because I am much more sure of the efficiency of my gesture. Not that I want to be efficient, but I am efficient naturally because I say always when I give rarely classes of conducting, I do that from time to time. I did that, for instance, with the Cleveland Orchestra in New York. I do it again just for 2 sessions in Paris. And I say to the conductors, make the gesture as you want to hear. If I want to hear the Webern, the kind of, you know, the beginning, the kind of ostinato at the beginning, what it represents exactly, this beginning of Opus 10, that's just a kind of clock, you know, a poetic clock, but a clock very regular like that. And then, you don't have to be precise like, you know, like a knife. No, on the contrary, you just give this movement, and then progressively people will feel the kind of slow pulse of the time. And that's very important. And on this pulse of the time, you have the melodic line divided with the first the violin, then the horn, then the clarinet, then the trombone, and then under that you have almost also some kind, and I insist on that, some kind of imitation of the, as Mahler would have said, Natur laut. When you have this harmonium which just tick, 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 that's like, you know, like in the grills in summer when you hear that in the country. This music has a realistic aspect at the same time, transposed in a kind of poetic environment, but you must take all that in consideration and not only see a triplet against 2, you know. And that's the kind of transposition you have to do. Of course, the triplets of the harmonium against the 2 of the harp and the tremolo of the mandolin, it has to be there. You know, I am always, you know, one speaks very much about me, about my precision. Precision is not my goal, but it is the first step. Because as long you don't have this very precise relationship, then you miss the gesture. And once you have this precision, then you can just, have the gesture, because the gesture is full and not simply approximative. I hate approximation, not because it is approximative, but because it does not bring the reality of the music and then the product will. That was a declaration.
At the beginning, Webern was more important for Boulez, but later on he discovered that the complexity of Berg became more important, because when he started, Berg was looked upon as the so-called Puccini of 12-note music, the most accessible. Yeah. But pieces like the 3 pieces opus 6, like the Chamber Concerto, are very complex, very rich in texture. And so Boulez was as much interested in Berg as in Webern.
Yes. Sure. In 1995, as we are speaking, you doing the 2 interviews with Boulez. Also, Boulez was in Holland not only for this, but to conduct Moses and Aaron.
Yes.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, it was Moses and Aaron was of course very interesting, because it starts with the voice of God, and the voice of God was not devoted to one person, but to an invisible choir. You remember how Moses and Aaron starts, and that's what Boulez interests, of course, the idea of Schönberg. The voice is coming from which direction. The audience just can't grasp from which direction the voice is. The audience hears the voices, but they don't grasp who is exactly singing. The same thing you see with Répons. You have 5 soloists, and then the material is transformed by the live computer, and you get a kind of virtual orchestra. And that idea, not that Schönberg called it a virtual orchestra, but that idea interested Boulez, among other things, yes, to conduct his piece. Apart from it is the late Schönberg, but very strong Schönberg, Moses and Aaron.
And was that a production with Peter Starr?
Yes, yes.
So this was 1995, which more or less is one of the reasons I am interviewing you, but we are now exactly 30 years later. Recently, we both saw a new concert version of Répons by the Dutch Asko Schönberg Ensemble. What was your opinion of that?
Well, it was great works of art. Répons is a great work of art, can be approached in different ways and remain a great work of art. And I liked the wildness of the performance. Boulez was perhaps very beautiful, but more sophisticated, if you like, more French. It was more in the tradition, the Viennese tradition. And what Boulez says himself, I'm a mix of many cultures, especially of the German and the French tradition. And perhaps this was more the Bergian side, if you like, than the Debussy side. But both elements are as strong represented in Répons.
It was the starting piece in the mid-70s for IRCAM.
Yes, demonstration piece, one could say. Yes, because Boulez wanted to renew musical tradition in so far that he would like to show that technical means can serve as a means in order to find a new musical vocabulary and new musical poetry. Whereas most people think when you use live electronics, music is cold, frozen, and you get all possible prejudices about music, but contemporary music. But with Répons, he has proven that, as long as the technical means are subordinated to a poetic idea, and a visionary idea, I must say, visionary poetic, because Répons is a visionary piece.
Why?
Well, because of the glittering sounds and the timbres, the colors, the virtuosity, not as means by itself, but the ecstasy, I would say. It's ecstatic music, and therefore I cannot repeat it too often. To see Boulez only as an engineer, that's bullshit. This music is so full of magic, of beauty, of a strange beauty even. But in order to reach that level of beauty, of course you must have a perfect control. Yeah. The dialectics. Yes, you have to. Everything must be in control, but in a way that the audience does not grasp that there is a control. Yes. You have the feeling that there's only spontaneity.
Yeah. Freedom through control.
Yes, and freedom is not, at random. There is a term in French, at random, that's libertinage. But that brings nothing, because freedom, in the creative sense, you can only reach if there is discipline, if there is control. But in art in itself is that the audience does not discern how the control is realized. And in that sense also, Boulez was a master, one of the greatest.
Yes. Again about Répons, if you had to give an advice to a listener, not described furtherly, but just a listener, what should a listener take out from listening, experiencing a live performance of Répons?
Well, it's a kind of musical theater, I would say. Be it abstract, but there is this interaction between the conductor, the orchestra in the center, and the soloists around. It was before the surround technique was officially in our equipment at home. This is, of course, a great example of surround. And then there's the interaction between the live electronics and the soloists, because the material was transformed in a way that other pitches were attainable, then only by means of the acoustical performance. Not only semitones, but much smaller scales. And that brings, it's really in the kind of magic, I would say. It is outer-worldly music.
What struck me, just the visual thing, I saw Répons in 2003, I think it was, in Paris, 2 times in one weekend, conducted by Boulez, and his ensemble and the contemporary performed it. And then you saw a battery of technicians behind their computers. Now I saw 2 or 3 computers. So isn't that let's try to put it in a question. Isn't that a problem with this piece, that the techniques that Boulez developed in close cooperation with the technicians, that this technique is dated?
I don't know if it is dated. I think that it's now possible to make much more productive and easier way, easy in the relative sense, of course, make use of the technical side of the piece than it was in the Beurs of Berlage, for instance. Mm-hmm. Look to this telephone I am having here. I have here a telephone, and this telephone.
You have to show it to the camera then.
If I would have the memory of this phone in the computers of, let's say, 1980, I would have needed a palace as great as Soestdijk. And now it's all on my telephone. That's the same with Répons.
Yeah.
It's a bit easy metaphor, but you understand what I mean.
Yes, I understand, but Boulez is always very critical about the sound, and it's not just modern sounds or so forth. He has designed this together with the technicians. So where is the design?
Oh, that's hard, because I'm not a technician.
Okay.
It's hard. But let's say that between the Beurs of Berlage and the performance we watched in the Muziekgebouw in het IJ, there are many decades between that. Yeah. And many progress has been made to realize the things in a more effective way. Mm-hmm. And that means that there are more chances to play that piece than perhaps than in the earlier days.
That is true, yeah.
Yeah.
What also struck me when I saw the concert is the Dutch Asko Schönberg Ensemble had a lot of young musicians in it. Some weren't born when the first performance of Répons was premiered. That brings me to another aspect I want to talk with you about, talking about Boulez. What is the relevance of Pierre Boulez for music now in 2025?
Well, I think the discoverance of new territories, and young people are, if they are approached in a creative and enthusiastic way, are willing to discover new territories. And that's exactly what Boulez is doing. Mm-hmm. The fertile land, Paul Klee and so on and so forth. And I think the fact that Frank Zappa, it's long ago of course, admired Boulez and Varese and Webern is also an answer to your question. Because Zappa was not a pop star, he was a real composer. Mm-hmm. Boulez realized that, and he recorded some pieces by Zappa.
I know. Perfect Stranger.
Yeah, yes. And the Girl in the Magnesium Dress, yes. And so on and so forth. And I think that if you go back to Répons, it's a kind of event within the avant-garde music, which has, on a very high level, hear what I say, the event of a pop concert, but then on a very high level.
I interviewed one of the musicians of Schönberg, Asko Schönberg Ensemble, that was performing Répons. And that's a young lady of 24 years old, coming from Catalonia. And she played the oboe. And of course, very talented, because... Again, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And I asked her several things, but I also asked her, you are 24 years old. Do you think that Boulez still has importance in your age group?
I think inside my age group, in the musicians' world, yes. I think so. Uh-huh. Outside the musicians' world, I don't think it has any importance. But inside the musician's world, I think it does but maybe more in this like history figure than a living music thing. I don't know how to say.
What is your first reaction to this?
I'm a bit puzzled. I mean, you can like or dislike the music of Boulez, but it's for me quite simple to answer the question. If you like it or not, Boulez is like Beethoven in his time, by far, it's my opinion, the greatest composer of the 20th century. And his contribution is enormous to the aesthetics, to the philosophy, to the repertoire, the use of material, the relationship we discussed between technical means and the creative process. But second to none, I mean...
Okay, but what's striking for me in her reaction is that she says, more or less quite directly, in the world of music, everybody underlines this. They see this. They see the importance of Boulez. But when you go out of that world, it's zero.
That may be true, but that is something different because people are now adapted to short span of concentration. To start with, look to all these talk shows we are having. If a discussion about a complex subject lasts for more than 3 minutes, the attention has gone. Yes. And in order to enjoy Boulez, in order to enjoy a good meal, you need attention, you need time. Yeah. And what we need, and that is of course something of education, is to not only to hear, but like a friend of mine always tend to say, if you are hearing something, please use your experience of hearing to really listen to what you hear. Because if you hear something, you are not aware very often what you hear. But we must train ourselves. I think that it's more important at school to really participate in music by learning to listen in an active way, not in a passive way, but an active way to music, than playing an instrument. Not everybody can play an instrument. I have to take myself. I have had much problems with my birth, motoric problems, so I couldn't play an instrument, actually. But I learned to understand the music by really becoming aware of what I was listening to. Like you are becoming aware what you're enjoying if you have good food or a good wine. And that's something that is not, that it is in our time, it's something which is lost.
So, this is more or less, we are coming to the end of our interview, of course. This is a rather maybe disturbing conclusion, because that means that, especially when you say it's needed that, for instance, schools and education should be more part of this development, which is, I think, is not going to happen in the world we're living in now.
No, but it doesn't mean that there will become a reaction that perhaps we will not witness it. Bach was forgotten. I mean, and let's be realistic. Of course, everybody knew the Matthew Passion, but who knows the Art of Fugue? Who knows the musical offering? That is the same standard as the music of Boulez, the same kind of abstraction. Of course, thanks to the development of the ancient music movement, those pieces are now more widely known. But still, it's not for everybody. Well,
are you optimistic in a certain way?
On the short term, no, I'm very pessimistic. I think we are approaching really a kind of dark age we are already in. Right. I needn't tell you, and I think I will not witnessing the reaction. But there will be if our world is not how will not be exploded by a nuclear war, then there will be a time when Boulez and Webern and all those composers are rediscovered. But then we are in the afterlife. We will not witness that, I think.
Also a dialectic process.
Yes, but the whole problem is that the people, young people, and I know from experience, I have taught myself young conductors, they are willing to listen actively, to participate, but you must give them the means that they are able to do so. And the development of our time with this bullshit politicians we are having now, in which culture is always the first thing to cut off. I'm certain that I can even prove it. When I gave a lecture for some years ago for the ladies of Freemasons about programming, and I discussed difficult formats, and of course with audio examples. And I thought, well, nobody will be interested, but they were interested. They were quiet, and there were intelligent questions. So it's the way. It's a way of education. If we are willing to education, to invest in the education, and everything is possible, even to make young students listen to Boulez, I'm sure. And then you must not start about serialism and what, just make them listen. Just give them one of the notations, that great one with all the percussion instruments. Yeah. They will be fascinated, I'm sure. Number two. Yeah. And that is a sequel of the Sucker, for instance. So, but it's the responsibility of the politicians and of the developments in politics, among other things, which leads to the fact that there is no, the enthusiasm is not feeded. How you say that? Not stimulated. That's it. That's the right word. But if we want to stimulate it, I'm not, then that would be optimistic, but I'm very pessimistic because of our politicians. And it's terrible. And if you see orchestras making bad programs, and I said to Boulez, how do you manage to play with all the orchestra you conduct to perform the most difficult music? Well, said Boulez, it's quite simple to give the right example. If we don't do it, nobody will do it. It's our responsibility to do it. It's my responsibility because I am able to conduct those complex scores in a way that the audience get fascinated by it. But if we don't do it, who will? Yes. And that's the responsibility as Boulez sees it. His responsibility as an artist to enrich musical life. And it doesn't mean that you have to know all theoretical theories, no, but being prepared to accept the adventure. Art is an adventure.
Okay. My last question to you, and this is a very personal question, can you describe in 1 or 2 sentences what Boulez has meant for you in your life?
Richness. Simple word, richness. The combination of ratio at the one hand and fascination and ecstasy on the other hand. The mystery we were discussing all the time, the relationship between, the secret relationship between freedom and control, and how to master that, how to bridge that gap, how to bridge the gap between control and and freedom. The most important thing, richness. Richness. Music should be rich, elaborate. I hate, it's my personal statement, I hate music. And I agree so with Boulez. Boulez said it to me. If I understand a piece of music at first hearing, it's not interesting. That's for me the same. If I hear a piece of music and it's crystal clear immediately, no. I want to be puzzled. I want to remain puzzled, fascinated, triggered. And Boulez is the embodiment of that approach.
Okay, now the joke. You told me that Boulez told you a joke, isn't it so?
Oh, it's via Hans Citroen, the late artistic director. He died many years ago, but I happen to knew him very well. Of the Hague Philharmonic, the residence orchestra. And you know that apart from the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, of the Concertgebouw Orchestra now, he conducted many times the Hague Philharmonic. Boulez. Yeah. And, well, there was a guy entering an animal shop. And he immediately was attracted by a parrot, beautiful parrot. All tropical colors. Can you imagine? Parrot?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. And the shopkeeper said, well, I see you are fascinated by that parrot. Yes, I'm fascinated. But that's not all. This is a very special parrot. Oh? He knows all musical repertoire. You may test him if you like. Okay, Beethoven, 9th Symphony. Perfectly tuned, huh? Oh, that can be a coincidence. Let's say Mahler's 2nd Symphony. Sterben wir dich zu leben. My goodness, eh? But yeah, it's still tonal music. I want to hear something else. The beginning of the last piece of the pieces opus 6 by Berg. Parrot, pom, pom, tom, pom, pom, tom, 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 unbelievable. Well, this parrot must be very expensive. No, you can get it for $5. Oh, immediately. But there's one condition. Okay, that doesn't matter. What is the condition? Do you see that ugly bird there? It was an ugly bird with a thinny skin, bones coming out, you know, terribly. You must buy that bird as well as his companion. Okay, rabbit in, I take both. But he said, I have that parrot. Okay, he comes to the counter in order to pay his bill. So that's then 50,000 pops, eh? What? Is that ugly bird? Yes, but you forget one thing. That ugly bird is the conductor.
Yes, okay. and this is a joke that Boulez told to Hans Citroen.
Yes. I find it a fantastic joke. And he is very decent as well.
Very decent, absolutely.
Yes. I hope that you, whatever you use of this interview, it must be one.
It will be in it, yes. Definitely. Okay, Maarten Brandt, thank you very, very much for this interview.
It was my pleasure. And it was my pleasure because you had a very serious subject, and I want to say that, and perhaps you can do something with it or not. Most interviews are so horribly stupid and, on the surface. So I'm very glad that it was really serious stuff we discussed. And that's what Boulez is about. Thank you a lot for your input.
Well, thank you.